Hi people, hope you're all well and thank you for coming to my channel. A few of the videos recently have got a little bit of traction, um, like 1,000 views, 600 views, they're getting decent traction, so that's always good to see. I haven't been able to respond to every comment, so if you have left a comment and I haven't got back to it, please excuse me on that. I do periodic live streams and I'll probably be doing one soon, so you can drop into that, leave a comment, share your thoughts, ask me questions, challenge me if you want to. The whole point of it is interacting with subscribers. I tend to do them intermittently, so there's no sort of set time because I find that people are in different time zones for one thing, and also there's no ideal time. So if you miss one, no worries, there'll be another. I might do one fairly soon actually. But like I said, if you miss it, no worries. I'll be doing these roughly once a month. It's periodic. Um, It's been a while since I spoke about British politics, and goodness knows there's a lot of things to talk about coming from the other side of the Atlantic, and no doubt we'll have more to say on that. But I'm going to try and keep this video to British politics. Honestly, I'm disillusioned at the moment, but I want to quantify that a little bit because a lot of people say that. Um, I've always sort of approached politics, domestic politics, with I've tried to approach it with an open enough mind to not just totally dismiss it, right? So I still believe there are decent people in the political arena. I really do. I think there's parliamentarians and councillors who get into politics with the right reasons. Dare I say, probably a sizable chunk of them. I won't say a sizable majority, but I think there is decent people in the political arena from left, right, and centre. I do genuinely believe that. Um, when Lord Prescott passed away last year, there were a lot of cynical comments and, why should we care? And other politicians, this sort of thing. I think that's very unfair. John Prescott fought hard for the minimum wage. He also helped to bring about the Kyoto Protocol. He made mistakes. There was corruption there. There were double standards. He was part of Blair's war cabinet. There is certainly controversial aspects there. But I think when a senior politician passes away, people should be open minded and think that when you're assessing someone's legacy, you should look at all aspects of it. And I think John Prescott done some good things, and that needs to be acknowledged. Um, I mean, as a unionist, when Alice Starling passed away, the former chancellor, I saw him as one of the main campaigners for the Better Together campaign, which was a successful campaign. So I'm forever grateful to Alice Darling for that. And I think bringing in the minimum wage was one of the better things that the Blair government done. John Prescott deserves credit for fighting hard on that. As a centrist, the most logical party for me to go to would probably be the Liberal Democrats. And honestly, if there were an election tomorrow, they would be most likely to be the party that I vote for. But I have my reservations about the Lib Dems as well. I do think, like Labour, they have pandered to woke ideology more often than not. Um, and as a conservative on crime, on that particular issue of crime, I don't know if I could align myself with the way the Liberals think on it. I don't think they would go as far as the Greens, or some on the far left of Labour, but fundamentally they would take a liberal left attitude to crime, which I fundamentally disagree with. I believe that people who hurt society should be punished. I do believe that judicial punishment serves a purpose. And it infuriates me when you see serious destructive crimes get a disproportionately lenient sentence. I think the legal establishment continues to be out of touch. Um, Not in every case. I mean, that that awful case in Southport, to killer there, Axel Rudakabana, if I'm pronouncing his name right, he's going to be behind bars for more than half a century. Um, that's appropriate. He done an evil thing. He murdered three little girls. He injured others. He should die behind bars. Whole life tariff wasn't imposed because he was a minor, but in reality, he's going to, half a century before he can even be considered for parole. By British standards, that is a very long sentence, and justifiably so. Um, so it means in the year 76, 52 years, 2076, 2077, he'll be up for parole. And they'll look back and say, back in the 2020s, you've done this evil thing. Maybe they won't give him parole. So I'm okay with that sentence. I think it's about right. But in too many other cases, it isn't appropriate. To be fair, because of the high profile nature of that, I think the judge would have been well aware of the optics had it been anything less. Um, but yeah, that is an area I would not be sure about with the Lib Dems because I don't think they are, they will always take that liberal left attitude to crime, which is this immediate response of we need to rehabilitate. Um, it's an area where I freely admit I am more conservative. My first response to crime is always, well, twofold, um, considering the victims and holding the offender to account. Those have to be the two starting points. Um, if your starting point is how do we rehabilitate, that's just totally misguided. That's part of it for sure, but it has to come after the offender has been held to account, which means judicial punishment. So I will, the liberal left attitude to crime will never sit comfortably with me. It's in my DNA. I believe that if you hurt society, you have to pay a price. Now, when I look at the political picture in this country, I am disillusioned, really. Um, and I always say to myself, when I look at the government, for example, I really try to look at it in an objective and fair way because there's a lot of people in Britain, let's be honest, do not like this Labour government. Um, People might say to me, well, if you also feel this way about the government, why don't you sign that petition? My answer is twofold. Firstly, I think of the hyper-partisan petition. And secondly, okay, we get rid of the Labour government. What do we replace it with? Tories? Reform? Well, of course, reform voters will have their reasons. They think they're going to stop immigration, and they, yeah, well, reform voters tend to be pretty loyal. I find that reform voters tend to be more loyal to their party than a lot of conservatives or Labour people are to theirs. So Farage does enjoy that sort of very partisan support. But the fact of the matter is, reform done well in the general election. But I think their success has been exaggerated. I do not think if there were a general election tomorrow, reform is not going to win. They might do well again. I'll give them that. They might even take some Tory seats. But I do wonder, is this a little bit of hyperbole? Um, the Tories, well, as far as I'm concerned, they were in power for 14 years and there's a reason that they were voted out. People shouldn't forget that so quickly. Um, so I just don't see a situation where we replace a Labour government and then it's a Reform government. I just don't see that. As far as I'm concerned, Reform is still a glorified protest party. I mean, they picked up some seats at the general election, but Farage is very good at criticising. He's not so good at offering solutions. I'm just not convinced. Also, whilst I agree with some of Reform's domestic policies, they do take a hard line on crime. I don't trust Reform when it comes to geopolitics. I do not trust Farage's attitude to Russia. I do not trust his sycophantic attitude to Trump. I just don't trust him when it comes to foreign policy. Um, they're right about China, but that's one of the few things they are right about. Um, the Tories, like I say, I think they really, really need to convince the public that they deserve to be allowed back into office again because sleaze was a huge part of their downfall. And Kimmy Badenoch has tried to downplay it. She said, we need to move on from Partygate. Now, it's true that at this point, there's probably more people angry about the winter fuel situation and the grooming gang scandal than there are about Partygate. But if Kimmy Badenoch refuses to acknowledge why people were angry about that, if, like a lot of other conservatives, she just wants to downplay it and say, oh, well, it's been overblown, she is not getting it. She is not getting that a lot of people, including myself, were furious with this attitude that the Conservative Party had, that there's one rule for them and another for everyone else. This idea that they were kind of born to rule. Um, Apologies aren't enough if you don't acknowledge why there was anger in the first place. And in the grand scheme of things, I agree. There's bigger things that's happened since then, but I don't think it was a small thing. That was the people who were setting the rules, breaking the rules. Remember, during the lockdown, anyone who broke the rules had heavy fines. There was a student who had a party. Now, he shouldn't have done it, but he got a £10,000 fine. And yet you had members of Johnson's cabinet breaking the rules. It's absolutely disgraceful double standards. And I do think it is an arrogant notion that conservative parliamentarians have that they're born to rule, that the rules don't apply to them. It's infuriating, quite frankly. I don't think Badenoch has really acknowledged this. I don't think she just says this vague, "Oh, mistakes were made, and we need to earn back the public's trust." Well, you haven't got it yet. I also don't like the way she's jumping on the pro-Trump bandwagon. Um, trying to dig up old comments that David Lammy made. I just think it's cynical politics. I don't think it's quite lightweight actually, and I would say I'm quite disappointed by her because I don't think she's stupid. I think she has some substance actually, and I do think that she has been on the ball with some important things. I mean, some on the left will dismiss the whole argument over trans pronouns and everything as culture war distractions, but there is a serious point there. When people are hounded from their jobs because they're not using the right pronouns, when you have hospitals pandering to this sort of language, I do think there's a problem there. Um, so when Badenoch was in that feud with David Tennant, I took Badenoch's side. I thought it was extremely arrogant for David Tennant, the actor, to say she should just disappear. There are very legitimate concerns around how some of this language is being applied, particularly in terms of legislation. Um, so I've always said that there's no smoke without fire when it comes to culture wars. Having said that, Badenoch has to be more than just a crusader on the culture war. She has to show that she could be a leader, and that means being very honest about why people turned against the Tories. I think she's right to reject any sort of merger with reform because there's too many differences. Well, I think they'd stab each other in the back. If anyone's been watching Traitors, it would be like I just yeah, I can understand why she's cautious about joining into some sort of pact with the Reform Party. There's plenty of people in Reform don't like the Tories either. So that's my reasoning for not signing that petition. I think it was solely, I also think it was hypocritical because a lot of the people who were signing that are the very same people who say that if you wanted another referendum on the EU, you were a Remoaner. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you're a sore loser if you're trying to change the results of a democratic referendum, and yet it's perfectly okay to try and topple a government that's been democratically elected. Our system may have its faults, but under our system, Keir Starmer clearly won the election. Labour clearly won the election. I've no doubt there'll be a lot of people who voted Labour do regret it. That's the nature of politics. And you know what? Unlike the EU situation, in less than 4 years, there'll be a chance to vote this government out. So it's not like people are being deprived of that opportunity. Now, I've said what I think of the Tories. I've said what I think of reform. Now I come to the government. I am disappointed. I feel that, there were things I didn't like about Labour before the general election. I didn't like the fact that Starmer took the knee, that he was pandering this sort of woke ideology. And I use that term not to throw it around, I use it because it's in our vernacular, and we know that it is. I suppose I'm contradicting myself here with the video I made on what does it mean these days, but I'm using it in this context because if we understand it in the context of the culture wars, it means pushing trans narratives on pronouns. It means pushing identity politics regarding race. That's what it means. And I am very, very critical of that stuff. I think it's divisive. And I think it causes suspicion between people. And I think it brings society back. And I do think Starmer has pandered to it. Now, in government, he's distanced himself a little bit from it. You see a lot less of that sort of language. And during the campaign, he was talking tough on crime and so on. Um, but he's a politician in the end of the day. And whilst I do believe that there is integrity in politics, I do, and I believe there are people motivated by the right reasons, it would be naive to say that a lot of politicians, if not most politicians, don't maneuver because they all do. the nature of politics. Um, Even the most decent politician you could find will have maneuvered at some point or another. It's the nature of power. And it's always been that way. It's not unique to Britain. It's something it's within the nature of politics, and I accept that that happens. But I do think there's a lot of legitimate anger about Labour. I mean, the winter fuel thing just looked callous. The thing about farm inheritance now, Labour will say this doesn't affect the majority of farms, and they're getting compensation in that. Um, my response to that would be if you have a farm that is genuinely quite well off and there's an inheritance situation going on, I've no problem with Labour looking into that. But the problem is some Labour ministers haven't exactly helped the optics here. Some of the things they've said, they've kind of portrayed rural protesters as being a bunch of Tory toffs. That is unfair. It's also um, undervaluing the huge role that farmers play in this country. I mean, it's a tough job. These people work in all sorts of weather. They work long hours. It's not like they could just go on holiday. I do think, we, the public and the government, need to appreciate the role that farmers play. It's not an enviable job, really. Um, so I do think that their role in our economy and the food chain, for that matter, needs to be respected. So Labour needs to be very careful with that. It may well be that there has been exaggeration as to how many farmers are impacted, i.e., most farmers are not impacted. But optics are important. The Labour ministers have to be careful with their language on that and not make it look like they're just waging urban versus rural situation, an urban versus rural war. Um, Foreign policy. One good thing Starmer's done is attempting to reset with the EU. I think that's important. I think it's good. And I think it's ridiculous that Brexiteers have a tantrum just because the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is trying to have good relations with our closest neighbours. It makes absolute sense from a point of view of geopolitically, from a point of view of trade. Have good relations with Ireland, the Netherlands, France, Germany. I don't understand this mindset of simply because Starmer's talking about cooperation. And they took the same attitude when David Cameron um, has spoken about this in his post premiership. It's this hysterical knee jerk anti Europeanism I have no time for. Um, the people voted in the referendum to leave the European Union. Keir Starmer hasn't made any attempt to rejoin the European Union. Okay, he hasn't endorsed any second referendum or anything like that. But my challenge to Brexiteers is if it's really about making Brexit work, why would you have a problem with international cooperation? Why would you have a problem, for example, working with the Germans or the French regarding controlling immigration? Surely that is in our interest. If you have people traffickers that may be operating out of Germany, more likely to be in the Middle East, but cross-border communication, cooperation is absolutely essential. So I have a problem with the hostility they showed to that. I think it's very misplaced. So I'm okay with Starmer attempting a reset, although, even he's being stubborn in some areas. For example, why I really have no problem with European students wanting to study in British universities. This idea that we should make it really bureaucratic and difficult for them. I mean, I know Brexiteers have a problem with free movement of people. The point is, this is mutually beneficial. It means that British people study in European countries. It means that you could do business in European countries in a more straightforward and convenient way. It's like Brexiteers want more bureaucracy, they want more red tape. I don't get it. I totally understand the desire to control our borders, but to the point of even being hostile to French or Dutch or Czech students, I really don't get that. Um, I mean, remember, these are people who are spending in the UK. They'll be going to British shops, they're contributing to our economy. Um, so I really don't get the hostility there. Um, but in other areas, I'm not so sure. When it comes to the Holy Land, I do think Starmer's between a rock and a hard place. Whatever decision he makes will be controversial. If he cuts off arms to Israel completely, and even today, 15 more people killed in Lebanon today. So there may be a ceasefire in Gaza, but violence is far from over in the in the Holy Land, in the Near East. But like I say, I do sympathise somewhat with the position that Starmer's in. If he cuts off aid to Israel, you can be absolutely sure that the right wing press and the pro Israel lobby in this country, including some in the Labour Party, will absolutely be out to get him. And they'll say that he's pro Hamas and they'll come out with other ridiculous smears. But if he goes the other way and doesn't speak out against the number of civilians being killed, then the sizable pro Palestinian contingent within the Labour Party, this is similar to the Democratic Party in the United States, will turn on Starmer. I do personally believe that too many civilians have died. I think Israel just hell bent on punishing everyone. Um, I don't think Israel has done anywhere near enough to minimize civilian casualties. And I don't see any moral argument for bombing schools, hospitals, refugee camps. I think Israel has the right to go after Hamas and Hezbollah, absolutely. But I do think it has went far too far. And it does not sit well with me, this attitude that a Palestinian or a Lebanese or a Syrian civilian somehow matters less than an Israeli civilian. I just think that is fundamentally um, a very regressive way of looking at it. So I think Starmer has probably done the best he can in that situation because he's going to be hammered by either side. The proposal a while back to cut off some aid did kind of went down as weak because he got attacked by conservatives, but he also got attacked by the left for not going far enough. The thing is, if we were to cut off aid to Israel, it would of course damage relations with Israel, but it's also a very minimal amount compared to what America contributes. So I guess the other problem is Donald Trump. You know, um, but this is one of the reasons I really am skeptical of Brexit because it made us overly reliant on the United States. And we're now in a situation where the government's treading carefully because we don't want to upset Donald Trump. And I have to say, I find it utterly pathetic that British Conservatives are going out of the way to suggest that we basically need to do what Trump says. We better not upset him. And they're blaming Starmer and Labour ministers for being on Trump's wrong side. They never ascribe any blame to Donald Trump. The fact that Trump has already rejected Peter Mandelson and apparently he's now kicking up a stink about David Miliband. Well, I think if Trump continues to do this, we should push back a little bit and reject Trump's American pick for being ambassador to the UK. I think we need to show a little backbone as a nation. And I think Starmer is far too cautious in this regard. If other European countries can stand up to Trump, we should as well. Then the difference is we're outside the Eurozone. So this is the situation. Not the Eurozone, I should say, outside the EU. Um, I just think it's made us overly reliant on America. I mean, the Commonwealth is something we should we should value, but we cannot rely on the Commonwealth alone because I just think I knew this. I knew when Brexit was going on. It's one of the reasons I voted to stay in. I thought it would make us too reliant on the United States. And we're now in a situation where we have to please Donald Trump. That is, that's frankly embarrassing. Um, China. I am very suspicious of Labour's attitude to China, and I think it is entirely wrong-headed. I accept that you cannot ignore the world's second biggest economy, and the Tories can't lecture too hard on this because they also pander to China. But Rachel Reeves going to Beijing, at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, Starmer did, to his credit, speak out on human rights. But bear in mind, we are now in a situation where there's clear evidence of Chinese interference in our affairs. We've seen a situation where British parliamentarians are basically you know, on a sanction list by Beijing. So long as elected British parliamentarians are being treated like that, I don't think Keir Starmer should be treating China like a trusted ally. It would be an absolute disgrace if he invites Xi Jinping to this country anytime soon. Um, and Starmer and his party uh, have to show that they take national security seriously. If the security services are saying there is an existential threat from China, Starmer and Cooper have to show that they're taking this seriously. And you don't do that by pandering to China. So we're kind of in a situation where we seem to be being played by two superpowers, the United States on one side, China on the other. Um, on the more positive side, Starmer and Lamy have been consistently hardline regarding Russia. I think they're right about that. So when it comes to foreign policy, I would say Starmer's got it right regarding the EU and Russia, but he's got it wrong regarding the United States and China. Wrong with the US in the sense, okay, maybe it's premature to say that. I mean, he done the right thing congratulating Trump, making those diplomatic overtures, but I just hope he is a little bit more vocal if Trump continues to come out with the sort of stuff he's coming out with. I mean, if Trump starts talking about, let's just say, we don't know what's going to happen in Trumpland. Let's just say Trump wants to buy up some Scottish islands for new golf courses or who knows what. I hope Keir Starmer has the backbone to stand up to him, and if he doesn't, he's frankly not fit to be Prime Minister. Will Kimmy Badenoch, she needs to answer that question as well. If she was Prime Minister, would she stand up to Trump or would she just be a sycophant? We know Nigel Farage. Farage is a complete sycophant. He will just give Trump whatever he wants because he thinks they're great buddies. But, Trump has a history of turning on friends. So we'll see. Um, Domestically speaking, I don't trust Labour on crime. I've already been quite vocal about that. But another area, perhaps it's disappointing me even more because, I never expected Labour to be tough on crime. But the issue around welfare, I just find that Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves are really, really trying to out-Tory the Tories. You know, they're talking now about looking into, pressuring airlines to basically hand over information before someone has even been proven to be guilty of benefit fraud, treating them like a criminal, using those sort of resources to look into it. And I know that money is lost through welfare fraud. I've always said that people who are guilty of it, they should face the consequences for that. But my big concern, I've several concerns. I think the postmaster scandal, when innocent postmasters were accused of stealing money. What's to say that this technology that this Kendall's relying on won't implicate an innocent person, accuse them of benefit fraud when they might have done nothing wrong? And they will not get a fair say because the tabloids are already vilifying them. It absolutely disgusts me. I can see a situation where someone is genuinely ill, they genuinely have a debilitating condition, and they're sent threatening letters by the DWP telling them they're fit to work. This Kendall, to her shame, is really trying to out Tory the Tories. And she'll deny this. She's clever enough. She won't use words like scroungers or she won't use that sort of vilifying language and she'll claim she wants to help people. But the reality is, there's already a sanction culture in the DWP. And this thing about, there's more people out there who are sick than ever before, could it simply be that we are more understanding of medical conditions than we were in the past? I don't think it's necessarily that people have suddenly become very lazy and dependent on the state. I think that's a false narrative. Um, sure, there are people who play the system. There was a gang of Bulgarians who actually frauded tens of thousands. Now that's a disgrace. In fact, it was more than that. I think it even went into the millions. That is an absolute disgrace, and I think the custodial sentences were justified. They were stealing from British people. Um, We've also had domestic, before people jump on that and say, oh, you're scapegoating outsiders, we've had domestic benefit cheats. It's wrong. It's wrong on taxpayers. It's wrong also on other claimants because they get tarred with the same brush. But I am disgusted that Liz Kendall is trying to out-Tory the Tories on this. And she is really just talking about it in such terms as if the unemployed are criminals. If people are getting money from the state, of course they've got obligations. Never forget, the Labour Party should never forget as to why the welfare state was set up. It was set up to help people who are struggling. It wasn't set up to punish people. And I think that is the path they're going down. They're just trying to out-Tory the Tories. And it really disgusts me. It's the thing that I'm most angry about regarding the Labour Party. The grooming gang thing is appalling. One of the worst crimes this country has seen. But I do think there's a blame game going on there. Remember, the Tories were in power when the scandal first emerged. And I think the likes of Elon Musk really don't give a damn. Why is Musk coming into it now? If he really cares about the welfare of these young girls, why is he only wading into it now? So, as much as I am angry about some aspects of the Labour government, I'm also wary of people jumping on the bandwagon, particularly if they have a partisan agenda. That's where I am. I'm pretty disillusioned. I'm trying to be open minded. I recognize positive things where they are. I think Starmer's support for Ukraine is entirely justified. I welcome his attempts to reset with the EU. I'm disappointed by his response to China or his approach to China. Um, and domestically, I'm very unhappy about the way they're approaching welfare. No doubt they're doing it to try and nod to the Daily Mail and say, oh, look, we're tough on welfare, but it's very cynical and callous. Sure, if you have someone that really is frauding the system, hold them to account. But the way that people are collectively treated like they're criminals, the threatening culture at the DWP, I would say remember the postmaster scandal. There's no reason to suggest that won't happen again. Something similar. Innocent claimants being told that they're fit to work infuriates me. And it is an absolute disgrace for Liz Kendall to go down this path. Um, it's a worse sort of political populism. She's not doing it because she has to. She's doing it to please the Daily Mail. And it disgusts me. Um, what else to say? I mean, some people might say, well, that's another reason, by the way, I wouldn't support reform because you can be absolutely sure reform's attitude to welfare would be, hard line and say that street claimants like criminals. Not immediately. They wouldn't do that immediately because they know that there may be some people in that demographic that would vote for them. Perhaps people who blame immigrants for the problems. Who knows? Right now, this country, I would say, is quite unhappy. We have an unpopular government, but no overall enthusiasm for any of the alternatives. Like I say, possibly the Lib Dems would be the best option, but even there, I don't trust the Lib Dems on crime. I think to his credit, Ed Davey is more vocal than Starmer on some international issues, but then he can afford to be. He's not the Prime Minister. I'll be watching the Lib Dems. I mean, I'll probably end up voting for them, but it wouldn't be enthusiastically so. I don't trust them on crime, and it ends up being a situation what I feel strongest about. I do feel very strongly about crime, but I also feel strongly about the welfare thing. Right now, there isn't a single party that I trust on that. Probably the Greens would have a more compassionate approach. I'm not going to vote for the Greens because they support Just Stop Oil and they don't even believe in the United Kingdom. They support Scottish independence. So why would I vote for the Greens? What I would like to see is a Labour Party being far less Tory when it comes to welfare, less pandering to China, and then I would be enthusiastic about Labour, or at least more enthusiastic. At the moment, I am bitterly disappointed by those two things. Their attitude to China and their attitude to welfare. It's just, I mean, you're never going to be in a situation where you're going to be happy with everything. But if at least if you can have a situation where there's more than half of positions you're okay with, and I'm not. I'm unhappy with this government. I mean, I'm just not enthusiastic about it. But I'm not prepared to sign a petition to have reform as the alternative. Having a sycophantic Trump supporter like Nigel Farage as Prime Minister? No thanks. I just don't, I cannot see that. And the Tories, like I say, need to prove themselves. The Lib Dems, 72 MPs is the best result they've ever had, but still far away from forming a government. So I just don't know. That's where I am right now. I'll close on a slightly more upbeat note. I really don't think everyone involved in politics is selfish or, I do think there's people with a heart in the right place from all parties, quite frankly. But as a citizen, as a voter, I am disillusioned. I can't deny it. I'm disillusioned. Let me know your thoughts.